this is Jenni Calma. I am going to share a mixed media project today for Tonic Studios. And rather than go through a lot of the products, I'm just going to go ahead and jump in and having sped this up because it is a pretty long process. So what I did was to use this 8x8 hard canvas board, and I gessoed it with just white gesso beforehand, and I'm going to make sure it's dry there. And I really didn't have a big plan for what I wanted to do. I'm going to use this as a mini album cover, and so I knew the colors I wanted to use, but other than that, I just kind of experiment with all of the different products and play, which was really fun after not having done that for a while. So what I do first is to use some of the shimmer powders in Atlantis Burst and Blue Blitz, and I'm going to just tap those on and spray it with a lot of water. I wanted a really light watery wash, but I also wanted it to be pretty vibrant, so I just used my heat gun there and kind of moved the water around. I am going to all of the colors I picked out were sort of teals, blues, and pinks, and picked them out of just about every product that I've got from Nuvo. And I'm going to use some dyes in a different way. So here I'm going to just mix a little bit of the Mica mist in Turkish rose in, and then add in a little bit of this shimmer powder in cherry bomb, which is the pink color. And I love the way the pinks mixed with the blue to make a little bit of purple there, and how I've got a little bit of the light pink there from the mist, and then that bright fuchsia color. I really love the way that turned out. So I'm going to let that kind of move around. I'm going to dry it a little bit and come back to it every now and then as I need to. But I am going to go ahead and start to use a couple of these metal dyes. They're brand new from Tonic, and they'll be all linked in the description below. But this is the one of them is it's like a tile dye, and it's sort of a frame on the outside, and then the it's called the Classic Quatrefoil Sunflower Array Die Set, or die, yeah. So I'm going to use that, and then I'm also going to use this other one. It's one of the box die sets. It's Dimensions. It's the Gesture box die, and it's sort of a like a three-dimensional kind of rounded triangular box. I don't know how to quite to say that. That is it's pretty small. It's enough for like a few candies or something, and I am going to use the base piece and the heart piece and some other pieces from it. So what I go ahead and do is die cut the both of those things out from just a plain white cardstock that I use in my printer. That's just, it's heavy, but it's not too it's not like really expensive or anything, because I'm going to use them in a kind of a different way. I wanted to just, you know, just have sort of everything sitting out and try to figure out what I'm going to do. I also use this, and I don't think I show it on here, but I also use the Keepsake Bookmaker photo and film strip die set. I had used that before on a scrapbook layout, but I'm going to use it again on this, and in a sort of a different way. So these were the first dies that we got as the design team, so that's why it's not in the packaging that, you know, that is the sort of proper Tonic packaging. So what I decided to do is to make a little cluster down in one of the corners using a lot of these pieces, and use that as a monogram for my daughter for this mini album. And this will be the cover for it. So, or a monogram at this point, I couldn't decide yet. So, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and start to pop out all of the inside pieces of this this die, and there's quite a bit. It's pretty intricate. And I'm going to use it, instead of using it as a die cut, I'm going to use it as a stencil, and use some of my embellishment mousse and add some texture to the top of this canvas. So I actually saw something recently on somebody else's YouTube channel, and I think they put something on the back of this the die, or maybe it's a product that came out that you use to help lift that out, or maybe it was like they used a lint brush or something and it picked up all of those pieces. I can't quite remember what it was, but it was a really interesting product, especially for something really intricate and with lots of little tiny pieces like this. But I just pop those out with my craft pick, or the majority of them out, and I don't have to be too exact because I'm going to use it as a stencil, like I said. So kind of trim that off so I can use that one side to hold on to, and then continue on pulling some of those off. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to I think I actually maybe run it back through my tangerine, but sorry, I have it off camera because there wasn't really room for it, and because I'm trying to not move the canvas too much. So I think that is what I do. I run it off camera. I run it through the die again, through the machine again, and then everything pops out much easier. I probably could have used a shim and maybe done it faster, but anyway, I'm going to just continue that on, get these things out of here, and then go ahead and use my embellishment mousse. And I have two expanding mousses and one embellishment mousse. Mousses, I don't know if that's how you say it. And then but I do heat up the embellishment mousse just a little bit to kind of dry it and to see what happens. So you'll see I kind of experiment a little bit with the different thicknesses of using expanding mousse versus embellishment mousse, which was kind of interesting. Anyway, all right, I'm going to go ahead and use my heat tool on this, dry it as much as I can. And obviously I need it to be dry because I'm going to be using the this kind of stencil. I didn't want to make a mess, so I just dabbed some of that up. And I love the way this came out. I'm going to use some of the mica mist there and just splatter it on top. And while that is drying, okay, I can't remember exactly what I do here. Oh, all right. I take some of this sparkle dust in Dusty Rose, I think is the color. No, Rose Quartz. And all the pinks have rose in it somewhere, but they're all different. And I just opened it a little teeny bit and tapped off like what's around the rim, and that was plenty. And it just gave it a little bit of glitter shine, and because some of the paint was still wet, it just stuck to it nicely. So then I go through, use my Tim Holtz scissors and just kind of distress the edges of this base piece that makes that gesture box. So what I decided I'm going to do is have that be the base piece of the cluster. So, all right, so I set that aside. I've got my embellishment mousse now. This is the Aquamarine. And I'm going to use this die, like I said, as a stencil, sort of. And I'm going to layer some of that in two of the opposing corners, just to give it some texture. And I didn't want to layer too much on top of that purple. I really love that sort of magenta purple color. So I do that mostly over the same color of kind of teal. And then I just take some of the whatever mousse is laying on top and run over it and smooth out onto another piece of paper, and then I'm going to pull those apart and put them on another sheet to dry that I can use for some other project. Alright, so I'm going to wipe up my Easy Clean mat here in my palette knife, and while that is drying, I'm going to take the expanding mousse well, actually what I did, and I didn't really like the way this comes out, so I think that's why I use the expanding mousse in this. I used the Mica Mist in the Silver Smoke color, and I didn't really like that gray. I wanted it to be more of that teal color, so I added some of the blues, shimmer powder. I didn't really like that, so that's why I end up using the and covering the entire piece up with expanding mousse. Okay, so before I do that, you're going to see I'm going to heat up some of this embellishment mousse, and it's a pretty thin layer, and it's embellishment mousse. It's not meant to be expanding mousse, but it does kind of pop a little bit of those little circles up, which I think looks kind of interesting. And I'm going to zoom in a good bit in and out of this video, and sometimes you'll have to forgive me. Sometimes I forget to move out right away, so some of it is a little bit off camera. So alright, so I'm going to continue to heat that up a little bit, and then hopefully I'll remember to zoom out. You can see that shine from the sparkle dust and from the mica. Alright, so when this is dried up pretty good, I'm going to and it got really wet. So now you can see it kind of, so that's what it would do if you were going to use it as the box. Okay. I think that still has to dry a bit, and I'm going to use that little heart there, and also use it with some expanding mousse. And what I decided to do is to make like sort of a little flower cluster, using lots of different pieces. So I think I'll zoom out here in a second. I'm trying to decide where and kind of what exactly I'm going to do at this point. Yep, need to zoom out. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to take this expanding mousse in Worn Linen, which is like a kind of off-white pearl-ish color, and I'm going to layer it on top of this heart. And I do it really pretty thickly. It's kind of like ice a cookie almost. And I found with the embellishment, the expanding mousse, that the thicker it is, obviously, the more expanding it does, and the more texture it gets. And there's sort of like an in-between that is a good balance. I'm going to add some sparkle dust there on top of it too. And I thought what would be interesting is to add some things to the expanding mousse while it was wet, and then when I dried it, see if it kind of stuck to the inside of it and kind of adhered it, which I do with this one too. So this is the Boatyard blue, and I use that on the bottom, and I do that sort of in about a medium thickness. So I've got really thick on the heart and kind of medium for this base piece, and then I did, obviously, the embellishment mousse was much thinner. So I'm going to take some different threads here. I've got silver and like a teal color, and I just lay it on top of that expanding mousse, and because I'm going to see if that kind of just blends in a bit with the mousse once I heat it up. So I'm going to zoom in here and let you see what happens with the texture. And it actually just kind of heated up the thread and kind of burned it up a bit. And you wouldn't have seen it anyway, but it was just something I thought might be kind of fun to experiment with. And then I removed the thread. I didn't heat all of this mousse, so it kind of left it really mottled and kind of sort of varied in the color, which I thought looked kind of neat. Alright, hopefully I'm going to zoom out again. And these are the inside pieces of this film strip die, and like the film strip is sort of supposed to look like it's kind of wavy, and then these are the pieces that come out from the inside pieces of each of the little film tracks, or whatever you call them. So what I'm going to do is to use those kind of as petals. So I cut a couple of the film strips out, and then I separated these little pieces into the different sizes that they were, and I'm going to sort of build a flower using those kind of as the petals. So sorry about the stillness there. So I'm going to heat up my glue gun, and I'm going to take, see, those are the film strips there, and then that's the interior pieces that come out of it. So I'm going to take my, I'm going to kind of move all this stuff to the side. And I think I'm going to heat up the heart here first. Okay, so I zoom in here real good too. And because it was so thick, it gets this really textured look on it that kind of looks, it looks a little bit brainy to me, but kind of looks a little bit like, you know, maybe leather, or, and it is really thick. But I really like the way it came out, and it ends up being good to pop out, you'll see, from this sort of cluster piece. Okay, so I'm going to use a piece of wax paper here, and I'm going to kind of build this flower up. And before I do that, I'm going to take the same colors, this sort of teal, blue, and pink, in the watercolor pencils. I think this is the Vibrant set. And I'm just going to layer some of the blue and the teal at the sort of tips of what I'm going to use as these petals, just to experiment, kind of laying that on top of it. And then I'm going to put them together kind of like the flower, and then I will end up adding water to it to give some color to this flower and kind of blend it out. And because I figured a lot of this would be covered up by where they're going to be glued together, so you wouldn't see a lot of it, so that's why I didn't have to color all of it, each of these sort of little petals, that's what I'm going to call them. So once I get those all colored up, I'm going to put them to the side, and take my, ooh, I love that bright blue, and take my glue gun and use some hot glue to make this little flower piece. I decided to put it, it could have been on the Easy Clean mat, but I decided to put it onto these wax paper to make sure it came off, and then if it didn't, I could just sort of tear the wax paper, or use it kind of as another layer underneath it. So I'm going to just blob some hot glue on there, and then start to glue down these petals in sort of a flowerish way. I can't even really remember why I thought this would be a good idea, but I do really like the way it turned out. And I think what's really interesting is that all of the stencils I used, I didn't use any of them in the way they were intended to, but in a different way, which I think is something that's, you know, a good thing to do, obviously, because a lot of these were intended maybe for a box or for a card front, and instead I'm going to use them for mixed media, and so obviously they might be a little bit different. So I'm going to rough up some of those edges too, the same way I did with the other, the base piece with my scissors, and distress them a bit. Then I'm going to take the biggest sort of petal pieces and lay them into this little pile of hot glue. And I'm just going to kind of keep building up these little pieces until I get kind of a solid piece. And I'm going to keep layering between thread and these little petals. I'm going to kind of pull them up and distress them, and I want it to be a little bit bigger than the heart. So I'm going to end up flipping it over and adding some more pieces to the back side. And it pulled off that wax paper really easy, so I didn't have to worry about that too much. Okay, so I'm going to pull that up and flip it over. And then I'm going to, after I distress those other edges, I'm going to do the same thing and add them to the outside edge of this sort of cluster with more hot glue and more thread. I wanted to kind of create this layering of that base piece that I did with the expanding mousse in blue, and then I'm going to have another layer of this sort of tissue paper flower I make, and then this layer of this flower, and then the heart on top of that, and then on top of that will be the my daughter's initials, sort of as the monogram. So that's what I'm thinking. Add some more thread, since there's already glue on it anyway. And I'm going to set that off to the side to dry. I saw a new Hedgehog Hollow did a review of a glue gun that is supposed to be, I think it's cordless, which is exciting, and it's also not supposed to be stringy, so it's supposed to cut down on all the little, you know, strings of hot glue that seem to come out, and be interesting to try that. I have a cordless one, but it doesn't really work very well. It just sort of eats through the batteries. So, okay, I'm going to take this tissue paper from Tim Holtz, this sort of kind of mixed media tissue paper stuff, and I'm going to just tear it into little pieces and create a sort of flower piece, kind of the same as that, the one I just made with the little die cut pieces. So I'm going to tear that up a little bit, and I just use a staple to keep it close to the middle, and I'm going to just keep adding pieces and cut it down a little bit in size until it will just let the bottom piece peek through and be enough of a sort of another layer for this other flower, and just give a lot more texture to it. Okay, so now I think I'm going to take my just one of my Nuvo brushes and some water, and I'm going to wet those the tips of it that I used the watercolor pencil on. And I really like the way this turned out, and since I had already adhered it all together, it didn't really I didn't need a lot of drying time on it, because I just you know, did it once it was all glued together. And then I'm going to just kind of continue to lift those petals up and curl them and distress them a little bit. And I think I end up adding some pink to it at some point. And dry that up a bit. So now you can kind of see where my layering thought is going for all of this. I'm going to add a little bit of, I wanted to add a little bit of this green color to it to make it more teal. So I just take a little bit of this, I think it's the Atlantis Burst, and of the shimmer powder, and add some water, and then just paint a little bit of the edges. And I'm going to do that on this base piece too, just to give it a little bit of more dimension, and then add it to some of that little tissue paper stuff. All right, I'm going to clean up. And I'm going to use my craft pick here and pull those petals up while I use my heat tool on it to kind of dry them and keep them curled up with more dimension. So I'm going to have this mini album for my daughter. I do one, I try to do one every year, but I actually haven't done one. I did one when she's 13, and she will be 15 next month, so this will maybe be kind of her 14-year-old one. And I just use just real pictures, maybe from one photo shoot or just from a couple different events, and kind of, you know, make sort of a little journal kind of album to her that she can read later one day and appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to glue down this base piece, and I'm going to start to layer all this stuff up together. So I'm going to tear some of those pieces up and make them a little bit smaller so you get more of that blue peeking out. And then I'm going to just start layering thread. I think that's the silver and some of the teal, and start building everything up. And I'm going to add that little flower piece. And I love the way that blue picks up some of the sort of blue from the background water, and the kind of the sort of sunflower array piece of the stencil that I made is kind of like this flower, and you know, that I made from those petals. And and I really enjoy the way it kind of turned out. So even though I didn't really have a plan to begin with, it just all kind of came together. And it was, like I said, it was really fun to just kind of let go and play with the products and not really have a plan. So I'm going to glue that heart down now, and that's the film strip piece, and I'm just going to kind of tuck those around two sides of it. Sorry about my head. And I'm going to just add some glue underneath the that tissue paper there, and just kind of layer that around. I thought maybe this way it didn't really look like it was sort of the film strip, but kind of, you know, abstract a little bit. Kind of like I don't know, it kind of looked like a corsage or something to me a little bit. So, and I'm going to add some paint to that so it's not quite so stark. The craft pick is a great thing to use when you're using hot glue, because I didn't have to worry about burning myself too much. Okay. So now I'm going to add some, I'm just going to use this as like paint. So I take off the top from the this mica mist. It's the Turkish rose, and paint a little bit on the edges and splatter some more around, and just make that not quite so white. And I've picked out some thickers from my thicker album that I'm going to use that are silver glitter for her initials. And I'm going to put those on top of the heart. Okay, before that, I'm going to use some of the vintage drops. And I've got the Bohemian Teal. This is the Bonnie Blue, which is my favorite color. And I love the way it pulls out that blue kind of purpley color from the water, from the shimmer powder sort of watercolor background. And then I use a little bit of the Dusty Rose. All of the pinks that I use all have rose in them. There's the Turkish Rose, the Dusty Rose, and then the Rose Quartz glitter. Well, actually, the shimmer powder is Cherry Bomb, so not all rose. Okay, once I get all the sort of little embellishment dots on there done, then I'm going to add my my thickers on top of that, and that's pretty much the end of the project. I do end up because that expanding mousse was so thick, the middle thicker here that's for her middle name, which is Rose, kind of gets squished down in there, and I didn't really like the way that looked, so I tried to pull out some of that from the centerpiece so it wouldn't sit down so far, and I ended up pulling up the whole thing, and I did tear a little piece of the expanding mousse off, but you can't really see it once I go back and put that on. So I decided to use my deluxe adhesive to make sure those were really stuck down good, because the thicker, really sticker part wouldn't look as good if it came up. That is pretty much it. Thanks so much for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this process and that it gave you an idea for using your dyes in a different way. And the complete list of products will be available at the end of this video and on the blog post. And we will see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.